The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had grown into her role with grace, yet today carried the weight of something far heavier than royal duty. The ivory dress she had chosen seemed appropriate for what lay ahead, though nothing could truly prepare her for the day's significance. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, moved quietly around the room, making final preparations. The silence between them spoke volumes. Both women understood that today would mark a turning point, not just for the royal family, but for the nation itself. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she fastened her grandmother's pearl earrings, a small ritual that always brought her comfort in difficult moments. The drive to Westminster Abbey felt longer than usual, despite the familiar route. Through the tinted windows of the state car, Catherine watched London wake up around them. People lined the streets, many holding flowers and small flags, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and concern. The media had been speculating for weeks about this gathering, but none of them truly understood what was about to unfold. Prince William sat beside her, his jaw set in that particular way that told her he was fighting his own emotions. Their children had been left at home with trusted staff, deemed too young to witness what was coming. The decision had been difficult, but both parents agreed that some moments belonged to adults alone. As they approached the Abbey, Catherine noticed the unusual gathering of dignitaries and family members. Her mother-in-law, Queen Camilla, stood near the entrance, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine emotion. Even more surprising was the presence of Prince Harry and Meghan, who had flown in from California just hours earlier. Whatever differences had divided the family seemed insignificant now. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey had witnessed countless moments of royal history, from coronations to funerals, from celebrations to solemn ceremonies. Today, however, felt different. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation and an underlying current of sadness that no one could quite name. Inside the Abbey, the lighting was subdued, creating an atmosphere of reverence and intimacy despite the grandeur of the setting. Catherine's heels clicked softly against the stone floor as she made her way down the aisle, past faces she had known for years. Some were family, others were close friends, and still others were representatives of the various charities and organizations she had supported throughout her years as a working royal. Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the altar, his robes seeming heavier than usual. His face, normally warm and welcoming during royal ceremonies, carried a gravity that made Catherine's stomach tighten. She had spoken with him privately the day before, seeking guidance and comfort for what was to come. His words had been kind, but honest about the challenging path ahead. The service began with traditional hymns, voices rising to fill the vaulted ceiling with sound that seemed to echo through centuries of history. Catherine sang along, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. Music had always been a source of strength for her, from her childhood piano lessons to the grand ceremonial occasions of royal life. As the ceremony progressed, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a middle-class girl in Berkshire to the future queen consort, the path had been extraordinary and challenging in equal measure. She thought about her university days, meeting William, their long courtship, and the moment she had said yes to a life of service to the crown and country. The weight of that commitment had never felt more real than it did today. Public service meant sacrifice, and sometimes those sacrifices demanded more than anyone should reasonably be asked to give. Yet here she stood, ready to face whatever came next with the dignity and grace that had become her trademark. Prince William reached for her hand during one of the readings, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support and solidarity. Their marriage had weathered many storms, from the intense media scrutiny to the pressures of royal protocol and public expectations. Through it all, They had remained partners in the truest sense, supporting each other through triumph and trial alike. The children were never far from Catherine's thoughts, especially during moments like these. George, Charlotte, and Louis represented not just their personal legacy, but the future of the monarchy itself. She wondered how they would remember this day when they were older, and what stories they would tell their own children about the grandmother they had known and loved. King. Charles sat in the front row, his face a study in controlled emotion. The relationship between Catherine and her father-in-law had deepened over the years, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to duty. Today, however, she could see the man behind the crown, vulnerable and human in his grief. The formal proceedings continued with readings from scripture and poetry, each word carefully chosen for its meaning and significance. Catherine listened intently, finding comfort in the familiar cadences of the King James Bible and the measured tones of the clergy. These ancient words had provided solace to countless generations, and today they offered the same balm to wounded hearts. As the service neared its conclusion, Catherine felt a shift in the atmosphere. The moment everyone had been anticipating was approaching, and the weight of it seemed to settle over the congregation like a heavy blanket. She straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she had built up over years of public appearances and personal challenges. The photographers, kept at a respectful distance, captured images that would define this day for history. But Catherine was beyond thinking about public perception or media coverage. This moment belonged to family, to love, to loss, and to the continuation of something larger than any individual. She was ready to play her part in this ancient drama, whatever the cost to her personally. The moment arrived with the soft rustle of fabric as Catherine rose from her seat. The entire congregation seemed to hold its breath, understanding instinctively that they were about to witness something unprecedented in modern royal history. Even those who had attended countless state ceremonies and formal occasions could sense that this was different, more personal, more profound. Catherine walked slowly toward the altar, her movements measured and deliberate. Each step seemed to echo through the silent abbey, creating a rhythm that matched the beating of hundreds of hearts. Her dress, chosen with such care that morning, caught the filtered light streaming through the ancient stained glass windows, creating an almost ethereal effect. The Archbishop watched her approach with eyes that held both compassion and admiration. He had known Catherine since her engagement to William, watching her grow from a sometimes nervous young woman into the confident royal she had become. Today, however, he saw something new in her bearing, a quiet strength that came from deep conviction rather than duty alone. Behind her, Catherine could hear the soft footsteps of other family members following her lead. The unity of the royal family in this moment was remarkable, considering the various tensions and disagreements that had marked recent years. Crisis had a way of stripping away petty differences and revealing what truly mattered. The Queen, despite her advanced age and recent health concerns, had insisted on being present for this ceremony. She sat in her wheelchair near the front, her hands folded in her lap, watching Catherine with an expression that mixed pride with profound sadness. The two women had developed a special bond over the years, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of the burdens of royal life. Catherine reached the altar and turned to face the congregation. From this vantage point, she could see the full scope of those who had gathered to witness this moment. Foreign dignitaries sat alongside family friends, charitable partners next to government officials. The diversity of the gathering reflected the breadth of lives that would be touched by what was happening here. Her eyes found William in the crowd, and for just a moment, the formal setting fell away. She saw not the future king, but the young man she had fallen in love with at university. His face showed the strain of recent weeks, the difficult conversations and painful decisions that had brought them to this point. Yet there was also determination, there a resolve to see this through together. The Archbishop began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the Abbey's acoustics. His words, carefully crafted over many discussions and revisions, sought to capture the magnitude of the moment, while remaining accessible to all who heard them. He spoke of sacrifice and service, of personal cost and public good, of the sometimes impossible balance between individual desires and institutional needs. Catherine listened to each word, though her mind was partly focused on the practical considerations that would follow this ceremony. There would be new protocols to learn, different expectations to meet, changed relationships with staff and family members. The life she had known for the past decade was about to transform in ways both subtle and dramatic. The media response was already being crafted by royal communications teams, though Catherine knew that no official statement could fully capture the human elements of this story. The headlines would focus on the procedural aspects, the constitutional implications, and the historical precedents. But the real story was more personal, more complex, and ultimately more moving than any newspaper could convey. Children in schools across the Commonwealth would read about this day in their history books someday. Catherine wondered what interpretation future historians would place on these events, what motivations they would ascribe to the key players, and whether they would understand the emotional toll that such public moments extracted from those involved. The ceremony continued with traditional elements that connected this moment to centuries of royal history. Certain phrases had been spoken at similar occasions for generations, linking Catherine to queens and princesses who had faced comparable challenges. In their own times, there was comfort in this continuity, even as the specific circumstances were uniquely modern. Music played a crucial role throughout the service, with pieces chosen for both their historical significance and their emotional resonance. The choirs. Voices soared through the abbey, carrying prayers and hopes that transcended the formal nature of the occasion. Catherine found herself particularly moved by a hymn that had been sung at her wedding, bringing back memories of that joyful day when the future had seemed so clear and bright. The international implications of this ceremony were not lost on those present. Representatives from various Commonwealth nations watched carefully, understanding that the decisions made today would ripple through their own constitutional arrangements. The monarchy's role in the modern world was constantly evolving, and today marked another significant milestone in that ongoing transformation. Security for the event had been intense but discreet, with protection officers positioned throughout the abbey and surrounding areas. The threat level had been elevated due to the sensitive nature of the occasion, though most attendees were unaware of the extensive measures taken to ensure their safety. Catherine had grown accustomed to living with such protection, but today it felt more noticeable, more necessary. The younger members of the royal family watched the proceedings with particular attention, understanding that they too might face similar moments in their own futures. The lessons being demonstrated today about duty, sacrifice, and public service would shape their own understanding of what it meant to serve the crown. As the ceremony moved toward its climax, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace descending over her. The decision that had seemed so difficult just weeks ago now felt inevitable, even necessary. Sometimes the right choice was not the easy choice, and sometimes serving others required giving up things that mattered deeply to you personally. The silence in Westminster Abbey became profound as Catherine prepared to speak. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, though few truly understood its full significance. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, carrying the weight of years of public speaking experience and deep personal conviction. Her words were carefully chosen, each one considered for its impact not just on those present, but on the millions who would hear them broadcast around the world. She spoke of duty and service, of the privilege and burden of royal life, and of the sometimes impossible choices that came with public responsibility. Her tone remained calm throughout, though those who knew her well could detect the emotion. beneath the surface. The Queen listened with particular attention, remembering her own moments of difficult decision-making throughout her long reign. She had faced constitutional crises, family scandals, and personal tragedies, always maintaining the dignity and reserve expected of the monarchy. Today, she watched Catherine navigate similar challenges with grace and maturity that belied her years. Catherine's words touched on themes that resonated far beyond the walls of the abbey. She spoke about the balance between personal happiness and public duty, about the sacrifices that public figures must sometimes make, and about the strength that comes from family and faith. Her message was both deeply personal and universally applicable, speaking to anyone who had ever faced a difficult choice between competing loyalties. The international media had been speculating about this moment for weeks, but none of their predictions had captured the full emotional impact of Catherine's actual words. Correspondents from around the world took careful notes, knowing that their reports would shape public understanding of these events for years to come. The story was already being transmitted across continents, reaching audiences who would remember this day as a defining moment in modern royal history. Prince William's face remained composed throughout Catherine's speech, though those seated nearby could see the pride and pain warring in his expression. The decision they had made together had not been easy, requiring months of discussion, consultation with advisors, and deep soul-searching about their responsibilities to their family, the monarchy, and the nation. The children, safely at home, but undoubtedly aware that something significant was happening, represented one of the most important factors in Catherine's decision-making process. Every choice she made had to consider not just immediate consequences, but the long-term impact on George, Charlotte, and Louis. Their futures were inextricably linked to the monarchy, yet they deserved the chance to grow up with as much normalcy as their circumstances would allow. Catherine's background, once seen by some as a liability in her early years as a royal, now proved to be one of her greatest strengths. Her middle-class upbringing had given her a perspective on ordinary life that many royals lacked, and her experience navigating the transition from private citizen to public figure had prepared her for moments exactly like this one. The charitable organizations that Catherine had supported throughout her royal career were represented in the congregation, their leaders understanding that today's events might affect their future partnerships with the royal family. Her work with children's charities, mental health organizations, and arts programs had been more than ceremonial duties. They reflected genuine passions that had shaped her approach to royal service. The historical precedents for what was happening today were limited, making this ceremony particularly significant. Constitutional experts and royal historians would debate the implications for years to come, but in the moment, the focus was on the human story unfolding before hundreds of witnesses. The monarchy's ability to adapt and evolve had always been key to its survival, and today marked another chapter in that ongoing story. Catherine's education at the University of St. Andrews, where she had met William, seemed like a lifetime ago. The young woman who had studied art history and lived in university accommodation could hardly have imagined the path that lay ahead. Yet the qualities that had attracted William to her then, her intelligence, humor, and down-to-earth nature, were the same ones that had made her such an effective royal. The security implications of the ceremony extended beyond the abbey itself. Plans had been made for various contingencies, with multiple agencies coordinating to ensure the safety of all attendees. The presence of so many high-profile figures in one location always created challenges for protection services, but today's elevated emotional stakes added an extra layer of complexity to their preparations. The language Catherine used in her speech was deliberately accessible, avoiding the sometimes archaic terminology that could make royal pronouncements seem distant from ordinary people's experiences. She wanted her words to reach not just constitutional scholars and government officials, but parents, students, and workers who might be facing their own difficult choices about balancing personal desires with responsibilities to others. The timing of the ceremony scheduled for mid-morning, allowed for optimal broadcasting conditions around the world. Time zones had been carefully considered to maximize the global audience, understanding that the impact of Catherine's words would extend far beyond British shores. Commonwealth nations in particular would be watching closely for any implications for their own relationships with the Crown. Behind the formal ceremony lay months of private struggle and consultation. Catherine had sought advice from former royals, constitutional experts, religious leaders, and trusted friends. The decision had ultimately been hers to make, but she had not made it in isolation. The support system that had developed around her over the years had proved invaluable during this challenging period. The Abbey's acoustics carried Catherine's voice to every corner of the ancient building, ensuring that even those in the furthest pews could hear every word clearly. The building itself seemed to be participating in the ceremony, its history and grandeur providing an appropriate backdrop for such a significant moment. Generations of royals had marked important life events within these walls, and today continued that tradition. The moment Catherine finished speaking, a profound silence settled over Westminster Abbey. It was not the empty quiet of an absent crowd, but the full, heavy silence of hundreds of people processing something extraordinary. The Archbishop stepped forward, his movements deliberate and respectful, understanding that he was facilitating a moment that would be remembered long after all present had departed this earth. Catherine's hands, which had remained steady throughout her speech, now showed the slightest tremor as she prepared for what came next. The formal aspects of the ceremony had been rehearsed, but no amount of preparation could fully ready someone for the emotional reality of such a moment. She thought briefly of her children, hoped they were being kept occupied with activities that would distract them from the gravity of what their mother was experiencing. The Queen, despite her physical frailty, requested to be moved closer to the altar. Her wheelchair was positioned where she could clearly see Catherine's face, and for a moment, the two women's eyes met. In that exchange, years of shared understanding passed between them. The older woman had faced her own moments of impossible choice throughout her long reign, and she recognized in Catherine the same combination of resolve and sacrifice that had defined her own service to the Crown. Prince Harry, who had arrived from California just hours earlier, watched from his position in the family section with an expression of complex emotions. The past few years had strained his relationship with the royal family, but witnessing Catherine's dignity in this moment seemed to remind him of the values that had once united them all. His wife Meghan sat beside him, her own understanding of royal pressures giving her unique insight into what Catherine was experiencing. The ceremony's next phase required Catherine to move to a different position within the Abbey. As she walked, her heels creating a steady rhythm against the stone floor, the congregation remained absolutely still. Even the usually restless members of the press gallery were motionless, recognizing that they were witnessing something that transcended ordinary news events. The international dignitaries present represented governments and institutions from around the world, many of whom had developed working relationships with Catherine over the years. Her approach to royal diplomacy had always been characterized by genuine interest in others and careful preparation for each encounter. Today, they were seeing the personal cost of public service in a way that few outsiders ever witnessed. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, sat with other family members, her face a study in maternal pride mixed with concern. She had watched her daughter navigate the complexities of royal life with grace and determination, but she also understood the personal sacrifices involved better than most. The middle-class family from Berkshire had been transformed by Catherine's marriage, but they had never lost sight of the young woman at the heart of the fairy tale. The charitable sector was well represented in the congregation, with leaders from organizations that had benefited from Catherine's patronage over the years. Her approach to charity work had always emphasized genuine engagement rather than mere ceremonial appearances. She had visited hospitals, schools, and community centers, listening to people's stories and using her platform to amplify causes that might otherwise go unnoticed. The timing of the ceremony, coming after months of speculation in the media, had created intense public interest. Streets around Westminster were filled with well-wishers and curious onlookers, many holding flowers and homemade signs expressing support for Catherine and the royal family. The mood outside was respectful but emotionally charged, with people understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment. Inside the abbey, the ancient stones seemed to absorb the weight of the moment. The building had hosted coronations, weddings, and funerals for nearly 1,000 years, but today felt different. There was an intimacy to the proceedings despite the grandeur of the setting, a sense that the formal ceremony was serving as a container for deeply personal emotions and decisions. Catherine's education and background had prepared her for public speaking, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional complexity of this particular moment. She drew strength from her faith, which had deepened during her years as a royal, and from her sense of duty to something larger than herself. The young woman who had once been criticized for her middle-class origins now exemplified the best qualities of both traditional royal service and modern accessibility. The security arrangements for the ceremony extended far beyond the abbey itself. Multiple agencies had coordinated to create protective barriers that were invisible to most attendees, but absolutely essential for the safety of all present. The emotional stakes of the day, combined with the presence of so many high-profile figures, created challenges that required careful planning and flawless execution. The music throughout the ceremony had been chosen for both its historical significance and its emotional appropriateness. Pieces that had been performed at previous royal occasions were interwoven with selections that had personal meaning for Catherine and William. The organist, aware of the unique nature of the event, played with particular sensitivity to the emotional undercurrents flowing through the congregation. Catherine's approach to royal duties had always emphasized authenticity within the constraints of protocol. She had never seemed entirely comfortable with the more theatrical aspects of royal ceremony, preferring engagement that felt genuine and meaningful. Today, however, she embodied both personal sincerity and institutional dignity in a way that served the moment perfectly. The younger members of the royal family watched with particular attention, understanding that they were witnessing lessons about duty, sacrifice, and leadership that would inform their own futures. The monarchy's survival depended on its ability to evolve while maintaining its essential character, and today demonstrated how personal choices by individual royals could serve that larger institutional purpose. As the ceremony moved toward its climax, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace descending over her. The decision that had caused so much internal struggle now felt not just right, but inevitable. Sometimes the path forward became clear only when you stopped fighting against it and accepted what your conscience and circumstances demanded. The culminating moment approached with the weight of centuries behind it. Catherine moved with measured steps toward the center of the abbey, where a simple wooden kneeler had been placed on the ancient stones. The symbolism was unmistakable to those familiar with royal protocol, yet the human element of the gesture transcended any ceremonial significance. As Catherine approached the kneeler, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the abbey's ornate surfaces. For just a moment, she saw not the Princess of Wales, not the future Queen Consort, but simply Catherine Elizabeth Middleton, the girl from Berkshire who had grown into this role through love, duty, and an unexpected strength she hadn't known she possessed. The congregation watched in absolute silence as she knelt. The simple act seemed to echo through the vast space, each person present understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered and discussed for generations. Even the most experienced royal correspondents, who had covered countless ceremonies and state occasions, found themselves moved by the profound dignity of the moment. King Charles, seated in the front row, closed his eyes briefly as he watched his daughter-in-law kneel. The decision that had brought them to this moment had been difficult for the entire family, requiring conversations and consultations that had sometimes been painful but always honest. His respect for Catherine, already substantial, had deepened. Throughout the process, as he witnessed her careful consideration of all the factors involved. The Archbishop's voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of his office and the solemnity of the moment. His words had been crafted through extensive consultation with constitutional experts, theologians, and members of the royal family. Yet despite all the preparation, speaking them in this setting, with Catherine kneeling before him, invested them with an emotional power that no amount of rehearsal could have anticipated. Prince William, watching from his position among the family members, felt the full weight of their shared decision. The months of discussion, the sleepless nights, the careful weighing of alternatives, all of it had led to this moment. His face remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the profound emotion he was fighting to contain. The international implications of what was happening began to resonate through diplomatic channels even as the ceremony continued. Ambassadors and high commissioners present were already mentally drafting reports to their governments, understanding that the constitutional and political ramifications would need careful analysis and response. Catherine's head remained bowed. Throughout the formal portions of the ceremony, her posture conveying both submission to duty and quiet strength. The diamond tiara she wore caught the light filtering through the abbey's stained glass windows, creating brief moments of brilliance that seemed to symbolize the intersection of human frailty and institutional permanence. The silence in the abbey was so complete that the rustling of fabric seemed amplified, the soft breathing of hundreds of people creating a subtle rhythm that underscored the solemnity of the occasion. Even the youngest attendees, perhaps not fully understanding the significance of what they were witnessing, seemed to sense that this was a moment requiring their quiet attention. Behind the formal ceremony lay years of preparation that few outside the royal family could fully appreciate. Catherine's education in constitutional law, her mentorship by senior royals, her careful study of precedents and protocols, all of it had been leading to moments like this when personal choice intersected with institutional necessity. Thus, Queen, despite her advanced age and recent health challenges, had insisted on being present for this ceremony. From her wheelchair, she watched Catherine with eyes that held both pride and profound understanding. Her own long reign had included numerous moments when personal preference had to yield to constitutional duty, and she recognized in Catherine the same qualities that had sustained her own service to the crown. The charitable organizations represented in the congregation understood that today's events might reshape their relationships with the royal family. Catherine's particular interests in mental health, children's welfare, and the arts had shaped her patronages, and her approach to these roles had always emphasized genuine engagement rather than mere ceremonial obligation. The media presence, though carefully controlled and positioned at respectful distances, captured images that would define this moment for history. Photographers who had covered royal events for decades recognized the unique nature of what they were documenting, understanding that these images would be studied and analyzed for years to come. Catherine's prayer, offered silently as she knelt, encompassed not just her own situation but the broader implications of her decision. She thought of the people across the Commonwealth who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity, of the charitable causes that depended on royal patronage, and of the delicate balance between personal authenticity and institutional duty that defined modern monarchy. The ceremony's ancient traditions took on new meaning in this contemporary context. Phrases that had been spoken for centuries suddenly felt immediate and relevant, connecting Catherine's individual choice to a continuum of service and sacrifice that stretched back through generations of royal history. The younger royals present, particularly those who might one day face similar decisions, watched with special attention. They were learning lessons about leadership, duty, and personal integrity that could not be taught in any classroom or through any formal instruction. The example being set today would influence their own approaches to royal service for decades. to come. As the formal portions of the ceremony neared their conclusion, Catherine felt a sense of completion rather than ending. The decision that had seemed so difficult was now behind her, transformed from internal struggle into public commitment. The peace she felt was not the absence of challenge, but the presence of clarity about the path forward. The final moment arrived with the gentleness of dawn breaking over ancient stones. Catherine remained kneeling, her head bowed in a gesture that spoke to something deeper than protocol or ceremony. In that position, she embodied not just personal humility, but the very essence of service that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change and challenge. The Queen, moved by what she was witnessing, made an unprecedented gesture. Despite her physical limitations and the formal nature of the occasion, she requested to be brought closer to where Catherine knelt. The soft whir of her wheelchair's motor seemed to echo through the silent abbey as she was positioned near enough to place her hand gently on Catherine's shoulder. That single touch conveyed everything words could not express. The passing of wisdom from one generation to the next, the recognition of shared sacrifice, the understanding that came only from having carried the weight of crown and duty. Even hardened journalists found their eyes filling with tears as they witnessed this moment of genuine human connection within the formal grandeur of state ceremony. The Archbishop, recognizing the profound nature of what was unfolding, adapted his planned words to acknowledge the Queen's gesture. His voice, when he spoke, carried new depths of emotion and meaning. The formal ceremony had transcended its planned boundaries to become something more personal, more meaningful, and ultimately more powerful than anyone had anticipated. Catherine felt the Queen's touch and understood its significance immediately. This was not just approval or support, but a kind of passing of the torch, a recognition that the younger woman had earned her place not through birth or marriage alone, but through the demonstration of character under pressure. The moment would stay with her for the rest of her life. Prince William, watching this interaction between his grandmother and his wife, felt the full weight of continuity and change that defined the modern monarchy. The institution he would one day lead was being shaped by the choices being made in this very moment, and the example of grace under pressure that Catherine was providing would influence royal service for generations to come. The congregation, witnessing this unscripted moment of genuine emotion, understood that they were seeing beyond the formal structures of monarchy to the human hearts that sustained it. The silence was no longer formal protocol, but natural reverence for something sacred and deeply moving. International observers, many of whom had approached the ceremony with professional detachment, found themselves unexpectedly affected by the human drama unfolding before them. This was not just constitutional procedure or political theater, but a demonstration of personal character that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. The children, safe at home, but somehow present in everyone's thoughts, represented the future that all of this ceremony was ultimately serving. Catherine's decision, the Queen's gesture of support, and the family's unity in this moment were all investments in a future that would be shaped by the example being set today. As Catherine slowly rose from her kneeling position, assisted gently by the Archbishop, her face showed a transformation that was visible to everyone present. The strain and uncertainty of recent weeks had been replaced by a calm resolution, a peace that came from having made the right choice, regardless of its personal cost. The Queen's eyes, bright despite her age and frailty, met Catherine's with an expression of unmistakable pride. The young woman she had welcomed into the family over a decade ago had grown into someone worthy of the confidence and trust that the monarchy required. The institution would survive and thrive because of choices like the one being witnessed today. The formal conclusion of the ceremony proceeded with renewed dignity and meaning. Each traditional element, the hymns, the prayers, the formal pronouncements, took on deeper significance because of the human drama that had unfolded within their familiar framework. The ancient words seemed newly relevant and powerfully appropriate. As the congregation began to process out of the abbey, following the established order of precedence, the weight of what had been witnessed settled over them all. They had come expecting ceremony and left having experienced something. Approaching the sacred, the formal machinery of state had served as a container for profound human truth. The media coverage that followed would attempt to capture and analyze what had occurred, but those present understood that the most important aspects of the ceremony could not be fully conveyed through words or images. The essence of what had happened existed in the realm of character and conscience, where the most important battles of leadership are always fought and won. Catherine's decision, whatever its specific details, had been transformed from personal choice into public example. The way she had handled the pressure, the dignity with which she had approached an impossible situation, and the grace she had shown under scrutiny would become part of the monarchy's living tradition. The Queen's unprecedented gesture of support would be remembered as one of the defining moments of her long reign. In choosing to physically demonstrate her approval and affection for Catherine, she had shown that the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in its formal powers, but in its capacity for genuine human connection and mutual support. The silence that had marked the ceremony's climax continued as people filed out into the London afternoon. No one seemed eager to break the spell with ordinary conversation. The day's events had reminded everyone present why the monarchy endured, not because of wealth or tradition or constitutional necessity, but because of moments like this when individual character served something larger than self. The story would be told and retold for generations, but those who had witnessed it firsthand would always know that the most important part could never be fully captured in words. They had seen conscience in action, duty personified, and grace under the ultimate pressure. Catherine had bowed her head, and in that simple gesture had shown the world what true nobility looked like.